Did you know that MAC is actually an acronym for Makeup, Art, Cosmetics? Welcome to the Cosmetic Chronicles, the podcast where history meets beauty and tells the amazing stories behind some of the world's most notorious brands. I'm your host, Sarah Carvalho, and I'm a beauty journalist who has been obsessed with makeup since my first swipe of mascara. In this episode, we're covering M.A.C Cosmetics, the Canadian makeup brand that redefined self-expression while democratizing makeup within the beauty industry. Obviously, there's a little Sarah story, so gather around. Auntie Sarah has a story about M.A.C. M.A.C was actually one of my first experiences outside of the drugstore and not at a counter, and it was actually in Laguna Beach, California. So I think I was about 14 and we had a family friend's wedding out in California. And one of our other family friends was a bridesmaid, and all of the bridesmaids were going with the bride to the local M.A.C store to get makeup for the wedding. And I was the youngest. I tagged along with everyone. So I just kind of tagged along with the bridesmaids. And the makeup artist at M.A.C was kind enough to do a little makeup on me. And it was the first time, one, that I ever had my makeup professionally done by an artist. So that, of course, changed my life. But two, the artist had used two different eyeshadow colors on my eyes, which now is like, that's like my regular thing. But back in the day, I was like, what do you mean you're creating shadows with eyeshadow? I was baffled. And she used a beautiful light pink and then like a maroon, kind of making a little smoky eye, but is very appropriate for a 14-year-old. It was like a very soft pink smoky eye. And then she put a little light pink lip gloss on me. And I was obsessed. I was like, this is the prettiest I've ever looked. I felt so adult. And my friend actually bought the makeup for me, which was so kind of her. And I kept those eyeshadows, I'm not even kidding, probably until 6 years ago. I kept them for at least 20 years. I used them for every big event, semi-formal, graduation. Just every time I used it, it just reminded me of that feeling of just getting to be one with like the older girls and getting to hang out with older people. I don't know if I realized it till I started doing the research for this episode that actually had such a profound impact on how I felt about makeup and artistry, because not anything wild was done on me, but I think just absorbing all of that experience ended up being a really big deal for me. So for me, M.A.C was such a pivotal part. And even though I didn't really go to a M.A.C store until much later, like actually using the products more than what I just got at that the Laguna Beach shop, I still just had such a fond experience there that I always appreciated their products. And it wasn't until probably 2012, 2013 that I started buying more eyeliners and more eyeshadows, and then more recently buying more of their blush. But I've always had such a love for them, even if my experience wasn't quite as consistent as a lot of other people's. That was just a great moment for me. And we'll talk more about those products later on in the episode. But for now, let's go back to the beginning. So M.A.C Cosmetics was actually founded in Toronto in 1984 by Frank Toscan and Frank Angelo. Angelo was a salon owner, while Toscan was a makeup artist and photographer. The two met in the 1970s and decided to work together on developing a line of cosmetics specifically for editorial shoots. They had become frustrated by the lack of makeup at that time that not only photographed well, but could hold up under the lights, and so they decided to create their own. So this was in the early 1980s. Toscan was the creative director and Angelo was their director of marketing. And they started to work out of the kitchen in the back of one of Angelo's hair salons. And they were joined by Toscan's future brother-in-law and chemist, Vic Casale. They ended up cooking up what would become their first lipstick. This was inspired by a bold pink Crayola crayon named Flamingo. Toscan himself said that it was the first ever matte lipstick that he found to look the same way on the lips as it looked in the tube. And they also found that the finish of this lipstick photographed beautifully. So at the beginning, these lipsticks were kind of created for professionals, but very quickly gained some popularity. they knew that they would have to launch it into like a general retail product pretty soon after they created it. So that lipstick line ended up expanding into 23 other crayon inspired shades, as well as a small range of pencils, bases, and powders. So they quickly started selling their products at Angelo's salon, mainly to family and friends, but word of mouth was very strong and it started to increase the demand so much that they decided to enter the retail space. So then officially in 1984, MAC Cosmetics entered the beauty market by selling at the prestigious Simpsons department store, now called the Bay, in Toronto. And they launched with the tagline, all races, all ages, all sexes, which is still, by the way, their tagline. And also, an industry first, professional makeup artists were the ones who actually manned the counter. So this was a big part of MAC from the very beginning, and it still is to this day. Pro makeup artists are the ones that work at MAC. They're the managers of MAC. You know, it's very much a professional makeup artist brand that has that as its backing, but then also makes it accessible to people who are not professionals. And so the Franks' approach to the brand was chic utility. So they wanted the makeup to come in black pots rather than in compacts. And they really wanted the packaging to be neutral because they wanted to be known as the color authority. So the packaging wasn't going to take anything away from the vibrant colors that they were making within the packaging. So once they launched at the department store, they actually gained popularity really quickly, not only across the country, but seeping into the United States as well. So makeup artists started to hear more about the Franks' carefully crafted products and the vivid colors. And so they started to choose MAC products to put into their makeup kits, which then, of course, expanded the knowledge to different artists, different celebrities, and at that time, a still rising star, Madonna. So Madonna very quickly fell in love with the brand and ended up wearing one of the company's signature lipsticks in a modeling ad in the late 80s. Talk about great promotion. So what happened is she fell in love with the brand. MAC found out about it, obviously was like, we got to work together. So they ended up creating a signature lipstick for Madonna's Blonde Ambition tour in 1990. Now, if you are a MAC fan, this one might sound familiar. So Madonna needed a lipstick to match her very vampy stage show. And so the Franks created a little color called Russian Red. This was a super sexy matte crimson with cool undertones, and it has been a cult classic ever since. So this was in 1990. They created this lipstick for Madonna. And then just 1 year later, 1991, with a small team of family members, including Toscan's mom, the company opened its first public retail store in New York City's West Village. Located on Gay Street, the store was situated in the part of the city that was truly the epicenter of the current AIDS crisis that was happening at the time. MAC Cosmetics' whole approach to anything goes, unisex, live out loud, vibrancy was just the dose of color and optimism that the community really needed at the time. And the MAC store in the West Village quickly became a hotspot for club personalities, for drag queens, and beauty eccentrics. Drag entertainer Lady Bunny was even hired to work the door at the crowded store. I found a quote from former celebrity makeup artist and beauty historian Rachel Weingarten about this time. She said, quote, MAC debuted as an iconoclast. At the time, women expected gold packaging and girly colors or formulations. MAC gave them stark black packaging and a cornucopia of products to play with. Way before beauty influencer culture, MAC was encouraging women and men and anyone who loved makeup to simply try everything, and not only the looks that appeared in glossy magazines, end quote. So playing up with MAC's diversity, the co-founders actually opted to specifically hire unconventional beauties to work their counters, choosing employees of every gender and who often boasted bold hair colors, piercings, tattoos. MAC was really the first brand in cosmetic history to invest in training and education of its staff, as well as the customer's point of sale experience. So basically, instead of pushing sales through traditional advertising, gifts with purchase, samples, etc., MAC really relied on its meticulously formulated products and then its over-the-top image, as well as professional experience. So basically, every time you went into any M.A.C store, wherever you were always greeted by a professional who had experience in a lot of quality and training and education around not just the products, but makeup in general, and also lots of color, play, a way to express yourself. People there obviously were encouraged to express themselves through their makeup, through tattoos, through piercing. So you kind of could go in and find your niche. And the socially centered shop also catered to a wide spectrum of genders and skin tones. And that was really hard to find at the time. And for a long time, M.A.C was really the only place where people could go in and really find a shade that matched and an undertone that matched. So before Fenty came out with their iconic launch, M.A.C was really the place to go if you wanted to find a foundation that matched. And so, in a way, the Canadian company was really giving the face of beauty a much needed makeover, not just with its ranges, but also with just the expressionism, just being able to do so in a vibrant way where you weren't shying away from who you really were. So, the store in the West Village began to receive routine visits from major stars like Michael and LaToya Jackson, and Japanese tourists would actually stop in almost daily. And then at one point, Linda Evangelista, the incredible model, mentioned their Spice lip liner in an interview, and then it sold out almost immediately. So here's a quote from the brand's executive director of trend, Kat Quinn, about that product. Quote, "It just spread like wildfire. People would come into the M.A.C store asking for Spice lip pencil without even knowing what it was. They just had heard that it was a supermodel pencil. And then you had Pamela Anderson and Mary J. Blige wearing it. People just had to try it. Supermodels were the original influencers." End quote. And again, going back to the point of their wide range for different skin tones, many women of color would actually come in and buy those lip pencils because they had colors that would actually suit their skin tone. So this was during a time when many beauty brands saw makeup as kind of this one size fits all. You have to fit into the what we offer you. M.A.C really expanded the hyperpigmented color range to include shades that could be used by everyone. And so before this line, M.A.C's director of makeup artistry, Romero Jennings, said that many of these women would have to use eyeliner in order to get their desired lip look. Quote, "There weren't any or enough options back then to create this contoured lip look, but now there was an option that wasn't as harsh. And because no one was blending the lip line back then, you could wear this pencil and have it look more approachable." End quote. And here's another quote from Rachel Weingarten. Quote, "What M.A.C does best is also embrace variations that go beyond pale, brown, or black. There is a shade for everyone." End quote. So then we move to 1994. So at this time, pretty much every beauty and fashion company was clamoring to put single name supermodels on their billboards. Remember, this was the time of the supermodel, right? You had Naomi, you had Christy, you had Cindy, you had, all the girls. And M.A.C decided, we're going to launch an ad campaign starring a Black drag queen from Atlanta. Now, almost instantly, a few things happened. The brand, the makeup, and a little known someone named RuPaul were catapulted to world fame. So this was actually their very first VivaGlam campaign. This was a burgundy red VivaGlam lipstick that was modeled by up-and-coming drag sensation RuPaul. And they decided that 100% of every VivaGlam product sold goes to their newly created M.A.C AIDS Fund. Watching the illness claim so many of their friends' lives during this time, the Franks felt like this was a great way to really give back to the community that had helped grow their makeup brand into the major line that it was becoming. So the M.A.C AIDS Fund was established to support men, women, and children affected by HIV/AIDS globally by addressing the link between poverty and HIV/AIDS. And according to M.A.C, the fund to this day has raised over $540 million globally, serving more than 60 million people across 92 countries. The VivaGlam product line has since been a bestseller for the M.A.C Cosmetics brand, and they've collaborated with celebrities for the VivaGlam line, both on limited edition lip glosses and lipsticks. So this VivaGlam launch catapulted M.A.C into a different stratosphere. And as you can imagine, that caught some attention of some people. So Can you guess which big hitter came a knockin' in 1994? If you just yelled out Estee Lauder, you would be correct. However, Estee did not buy MAC all at once. So in 1994, the Franks sold 51% of the company to Estee Lauder. And then in 1998, Estee Lauder acquired the entire brand for an estimated $60 million. In January of 1997, MAC co-founder Frank Angelo experienced complications following a surgery and tragically passed away at the age of 49. He was largely credited for being the driving force for enlisting RuPaul as the VivaGlam spokesperson. Thank God. And after Estee Lauder bought the rest of the company in 1998, Frank Toscan stepped away from the day-to-day operations of the company and focused on other ventures, but he still remained an integral part of the MAC AIDS Fund. Here's a quote from Gordon Espinette, the former SVP of makeup artistry at MAC. Quote, "The whole point of MAC is to create an environment where people can write their own story. I grew up as a complete outcast in Trinidad where I didn't look or behave like everyone else. I was an introvert, the kid who wanted to sit in a dark corner and draw pictures of eyes, not play soccer. When I came to MAC over 20 years ago, it all clicked. These were people like me. We were weird, and we existed in this weird world. We were a family of outsiders." End quote. The success of MAC under the Estee Lauder companies really rests on a tension that on paper shouldn't have worked. So think about it. MAC was born out of counterculture. So they were rooted in drag artistry, grit, AIDS era activism, self-expressionism, while Estee Lauder represented more heritage luxury and corporate polish. MAC was built in studios and nightlife, while the other was built in department stores and boardrooms. And yet, instead of flattening MAC's identity, the acquisition gave it scale. That contrast is exactly what allowed MAC to evolve into something rare, a brand that could exist in the mainstream while still feeling subversive, expanding globally without losing the edge that made it matter in the first place. Now, there might be some argument here that current day MAC might not have that same grit that we remember from the 90s, but I do think that some of their largest expansion and some of their great products did come after the acquisition. I think having that boost of additional R&D dollars and global expansion really helped to give MAC the name of being the authority. But I do think there at some point became a little bit of a dulling of that, of the grit that they were known for. But again, I would argue that it's more about the change in the industry, not so much Estee Lauder. But I would love to know what you think, if you agree or disagree. I would love to have a conversation about that. So the late 1990s and early 2000s were defined by global expansion. So after Estee Lauder completed the full acquisition in 1998, MAC began scaling its presence around the world, building out retail, distribution, and ancillary teams to support its mission of serving both professional artists and everyday makeup lovers. So don't forget, they still rely very much on professional makeup artists. They have their MAC Pro program for makeup artists to get products at a discount, to have continuing education. That's still a huge part of MAC's identity. And during this period, MAC really began to leverage celebrity ambassadors to bring cultural visibility to its charitable work. Artists like Mary J. Blige in the early 2000s helped introduce the campaign to mainstream consumers while maintaining MAC's ethos of empowerment and advocacy. MAC really started to lean into like the hip hop culture that was starting to move into the mainstream in the late 90s, early 2000s. And one of the people known for coming up with this idea was actually someone who worked at Estee Lauder. So this was from John Dempsey, who was the executive group president at the Estee Lauder companies at the time. And here's what he said about this decision. Quote, "In 1999, we embraced hip hop culture at that time with Mary J. Blige and Lil' Kim. That was the very first time that a fashion brand, let alone a beauty brand, tapped into the seismic quake that was taking place all over the world. That's what got it started. In 1999, in the number one song from TLC called Unpretty, there was a lyric in the song that went, 'It doesn't matter how much MAC you wear.' It had seeped into the popular culture. That was my lightning rod." End quote. And also, as MAC moved into the mid 2000s, its influence went beyond the makeup counters and actually became ingrained in the backstage world of Fashion Week. So they started to connect themselves with different fashion brands and fashion events. So the brand's makeup artists became fixtures at New York, London, Milan, Paris, Sydney, and other fashion weeks, collaborating with some of the industry's most influential designers and creative talents. And this was another one of John Dempsey's idea. Again, someone who was running Estee Lauder. Here's what he had to say about that decision. Quote, I made the decision to build out MAC as the ultimate makeup authority and backstage fashion resource, which took us from doing a couple shows in London and Paris to the largest participant backstage, doing over 250 shows every season, working with every major designer and every major makeup artist in the world. I took the artists and used them to conceptualize what the product offerings were. Where most companies do product testing on consumers, I made the decision to test products on the front line with the artists, where they're used the most and the people using them know the most about competitive products. That was transformative, end quote. MAC's backstage involvement wasn't superficial product placement either. It was artistry in action. For example, at New York Fashion Week for the autumn-winter 2012 season, over 300 MAC artists worked on more than 85 shows, creating looks for designers such as Jason Wu, Diane von Furstenberg, Carolina Herrera, and Alexander Wang. This era really cemented MAC's reputation as the makeup authority behind major runway trends, often working alongside legendary makeup artists like Diane Kendall and Charlotte Tilbury to translate the designer's visions into a backstage reality. And it wasn't just runway-centric prestige designers. MAC's team also appeared in editorial moments, helping to define the beauty component of fashion storytelling and shaped how millions around the world came to see professional makeup artistry. And then moving into the early 2010s, digital transformation was reshaping beauty. So what MAC did to kind of meet these changes was start to bridge that runway strength that they created with a digital audience and engaging with a digital audience with deeper collaborations. So one of the coolest examples of this, in 2016, MAC launched a highly anticipated Selena collection in collaboration with the estate of Selena Quintanilla. So the reason why this is really interesting is because this idea actually came from fans who started a change.org petition asking the brand to honor the late singer. And a lot of that is because Selena really actually loved to wear MAC. And so the fans wanted to have a collaboration between their icon and their makeup icon. And MAC listened. So what happened was Selena's sister Suzette worked closely with MAC to develop a collection that they felt truly reflected her legacy. And when it launched in October of 2016, the collection sold out almost immediately, both online and in stores. The overwhelming demand led MAC to restock the collection just a couple of months later in December 2016. And then again, after more engagement online, people asking, please, please, please do another collection. A second collection came out in 2020, the Selena La Reina collection. Translated as Selena the Queen, the collection was a chance to revisit the singer's legacy and her famous love of beauty. Here's a quote from the brand's executive director of trend, Kat Quinn. Quote, Selena is someone who organically wore MAC. Her signature red lip was Russian red, and she was always rocking the mahogany and cherry lip pencils. MAC embraced the singer's signature look by working closely with her family to make sure everything felt incredibly true to her and her fan base. You saw it in the shade range, you saw it in the shade names. We even launched in her hometown of Corpus Christi. With MAC, it's never just about slapping someone's name on a collection. It's so carefully thought out, and there's true intention behind every step of the process. End quote. So across these years, MAC also moved more intentionally into the realm of influencer culture, collaborating with creators and makeup artists who held significant sway in that booming beauty community of content creators. And importantly, this phase also coincided with a retail evolution. At the time, MAC products were only available in their MAC stores, but they started to expand in distribution and included some online partnerships and retail placements in new regions and channels. So for example, in May 2017, MAC officially became available for purchase online at Ulta Beauty, with products becoming available in the Ulta stores starting in June 2017. In May 2018, Sephora Canada announced it will start carrying MAC online and in stores. And then, of course, in big US beauty news here in the last year, MAC officially launched in US Sephora stores, Sephora at Kohl's, and online just this month, March 2nd, 2026. So when it comes to MAC current day, I do think there has been a little bit of a resurgence just from what I have witnessed online. I think there's been moments of resurgence. You know, Kylie Jenner kind of revamped their lip pencil back in 2014, I want to say, 2013, 2014. You know, I think people have been recently going back to more of the legacy brands, the MAC, the NARS, the ones that have been around for a while. And I think MAC, you know, they're over 40 years old at this point. And I think that for them, listening to what the artists want, what the consumers want, is still one of their strongest characteristics. And I think if they continue to do that, they will have another good 40 years in them. When you look at MAC Cosmetics from 1984 to now, what stands out isn't just how big they became, but how specific its point of view has always been. So like I said, it started with artists who needed makeup that actually worked. And even as the brand grew, that connection to artistry, to community never disappeared. So even when MAC became a part of Estee Lauder Companies completely in 1998, the brand scaled and expanded globally and became a fixture in the mainstream beauty space. But it held on to something that was a little bit harder to define, the sense that it still belonged to the people backstage, the people that were creating the fashion looks, the people that were creating the editorials. MAC was still theirs. And because of that, there was always that connection to artistry. And you really see that thread running through VivaGlam, the impact, MAC at fashion shows, collaborations that felt rooted in culture, not just marketing. So even that Selena collection, you know, that came from fans, that came from real demand, and it turned into a rare beauty moment that felt bigger than just the product, bigger than just the lipstick. And, you know, like I said, the beauty industry has changed. Beauty just moves faster now. Trends change in a blink of an eye, which is why the next move just feels really interesting. MAC is entering Sephora stores, stepping into a space that's really defined how people discover beauty today. It's a different environment than the department store where MAC originally launched. And it's just faster, more crowded, more trend driven. But in the same way, somehow, two things can be true, right? Somehow, MAC has always existed in conversation with whatever is shaping beauty at the time: fashion, music, nightlife, culture. And Sephora just happens to be where the conversation is now. And so by MAC joining Sephora, I'll be really curious to see how it does and how many people experience MAC for the first time. Maybe they didn't know MAC before. Maybe they weren't as familiar with it, and now they're getting access to it in a way that they hadn't before. And so, in my opinion, it doesn't feel like a reinvention for MAC. It feels more like a continuation, but just in a new setting. And if anything has stayed consistent with MAC, it's that ability to show up, adapt, and still feel like itself. All right, rabbit hole of the week. Let's do it. This rabbit hole of the week, I went down a rabbit hole learning more about VivaGlam. I did not know RuPaul was the first spokesperson for VivaGlam. I didn't know that that's how RuPaul became uber famous. I knew about VivaGlam, but I just didn't know the history behind it. So I went down a rabbit hole of the history of this whole campaign. So VivaGlam donates 100% of the selling price of its products to charity. By the early 2000s, VivaGlam had become one of beauty's most enduring philanthropic initiatives, raising millions of dollars and really embedding that giving back into MAC's brand identity. Like that, you knew that if you're buying from MAC, like probably there was some charitable something happening with that purchase. So, like I said, this was created in 1984 at the peak of the AIDS epidemic, and it launched with the Who is the MAC Girl campaign, introducing RuPaul as the first spokesperson for the MAC AIDS Fund. And this was, again, long before drag was mainstream. Andre Branch, the former senior vice president and general manager of MAC North America, said, quote, "Culturally, it was the lipstick bullet heard around the world. It was really shocking," end quote. So with the introduction of VivaGlam, MAC actually became the first brand to donate the entire purchase price, so not just the profits, the entire purchase price of a makeup product to charity. So since 1994, VivaGlam, like I said, has raised over $540 million. And it usually comes out with a different shade of lipstick or lip gloss to kind of commemorate that year. So some of those shades were Viva Heart, which was an intense brownish blue-red shade, Viva Planet, a creamy pinkish beige mauve, and Viva Glam 3, a muted brown plum. And most recently, I believe it was Viva Equality, which was a deep neutral. And in 2019, their 25th anniversary of Viva Glam, they actually saw a little strategic shift in how MAC presented the campaign. Usually it would rely on a single celebrity face each year, but starting in 2019, Viva Glam began featuring multiple changemakers and voices, which they viewed as a reflection of evolving cultural values and the demand for representation. So for that 25th anniversary, Rowe & Co., the award-winning creative studio, collaborated with 18 changemakers from around the world to boldly tackle topics surrounding health, rights, and self-expression through a lens of optimism. They created a film directed by Bardia Zanali, and the subjects told serious stories in a positive light, celebrating the new generation in an authentic and inspiring way. The film launched in over 20 countries, garnering 35 million impressions in the first week, and the accompanying special edition Viva Glam lipstick sold out in under 5 days. So this pivot really transformed Viva Glam from just kind of a periodic celebrity spotlight into just an ongoing platform for activism and community representation. The 25th anniversary campaign worked with voices across fashion, music, and arts, and reinforced MAC's commitment to health, human rights, and equality. So one thing I noticed in my Viva Glam rabbit hole is by the time they got to their 30th anniversary of the Viva Glam campaign in 2024, they started to broaden their charitable donations. So while Viva Glam specifically started as an HIV/AIDS charitable campaign, it has now actually expanded beyond that. Here's a quote from Andre Branch about that specifically. Quote, "When we launched Viva Glam, MAC founders were very aware of the HIV/AIDS epidemic and wanted to help. We haven't changed in our commitment to that cause, but the world has changed drastically over the last 3 decades. So while we are proud to celebrate 30 years of Viva Glam, we want to address the needs of consumers today too, and have broadened our charitable scope. Our expanded mission now drives equality for everyone while continuing our long-standing support for people impacted with HIV/AIDS." End quote. So now MAC is focused on 4 key pillars: supporting sexual equality, empowering gender equality, championing racial equality, and promoting environmental equality. Additionally, they are introducing 2 new Viva Glam grantees: the Trevor Project, which aims to end LGBTQ youth suicide by providing trans youth education programs, crisis prevention, and advocacy initiatives. And they stated that the Trevor Project will receive a $250,000 grant. The other program, the other grantee, and It Gets Better, which offers hope, support, and encouragement to individuals struggling with identity or facing challenges due to sexual orientation or gender identity. They received a $100,000 grant. And for that 30th anniversary in 2024, the brand named Kim Petras and Dana Paola as global ambassadors. And this pairing specifically celebrated inclusivity, artistry, and cultural influence while reinforcing the campaign's foundational mission of support, equality, and empowerment. And Kim Petra's involvement was particularly meaningful. She represents a new generation of artists whose identity, advocacy, and visibility align with MAC's values while broadening the campaign's reach. I'll end this rabbit hole with a quote from Aida Mudachiru-Ribois, the Global Senior Vice President, General Manager of MAC Cosmetics. Quote, "MAC became more than a makeup brand, but a platform for championing the underdog and driving equality for everyone. We will continue to harness the power of our community to transform society by leading with the same bravery and heart that drove the inception of the program." End quote. All right, we have made it to the iconic products. Buckle up because there's a lot of them. Let's start with the lips. We'll start with the lips, lip liners specifically. So, Linda Evangelista helps sell out Spice, still one of the many favorites that people enjoy. But there's also Chestnut, Stone, Cork, and Whirl. These are just some of the most iconic shades in the lip pencils. So, over on my Instagram, I'm actually going to be playing a little bit with Stone, which is this very, very cool toned lip liner, and I use it as a contour. And I'll also be using one of the lipsticks as well, so you can kind of see a 90s grunge look if that's the vibe. Then we have the lipstick, their original product, their original hero product, the one that Madonna helped make famous. Ruby Woo, I'd say, is their most famous shade still, with Velvet Teddy probably coming a close second. Ruby Woo is actually what I'm wearing now. I have it in the lip glass, so it's more of a lip gloss, but it is a gorgeous, cool toned red. It's bright, it's vivid, it's beautiful, and it was actually a happy accident. The brand was in the process of reformulating Russian Red, the one that they had originally made for Madonna, and they accidentally made a slightly cooler shade and we're like, hey, this is kind of nice. And so that's how Ruby Woo came to be. So yeah, Ruby Woo, Velvet Teddy, Lady Danger is also a big one. Put your favorites down below because I'm sure I'm missing one. And also any of the VivaGlams. Those are also fan favorites as well. And I mentioned the lip glass. So that is what I'm wearing currently. This is a very thick high shine gloss, very early 2000s in the thickness, very syrupy, but I would say it's a little bit more comfortable, not quite as sticky as like a Lancome Juicy Tube, but it has that kind of thickness, very pigmented. And again, one of my first MAC products ever. And I believe like the clear lip gloss is still a huge favorite among makeup artists. You can use it for gloss on the eye, you can use it in your brows, more for editorial. I don't know if I recommend it for home. It has just a beautiful reflective shine that photographs really well. And so that is a fan and makeup artist favorite. All right, moving on to foundations. I have never been matched at a MAC store for a foundation, and that there was a period of time where everyone would just say, oh, I'm a 40 NC or something. I don't know if that's even a shade, but MAC only named their foundations based on shade range, undertone, whatever. So there was nothing like fancy about their foundation shades, but people would know their MAC shade and they would take that MAC shade with them throughout the rest of their makeup journey and use that as like their North Star. And I'm ashamed to say I have not been shade matched at MAC. I feel like that's something I should do. Maybe I'll do that for the podcast. I'll go into a MAC store and be like, the fans need to know. But their most famous foundation is their Studio Fix Fluid Foundation. This was full coverage, long wear, again, huge shade range really early on, back when that was really not a thing. And they later came out with the Studio Fix Powder Plus Foundation, which was a powder. You can guess by the name. So it was foundation and powder in one. And this was extremely popular with artists and everyday users and was known for very quick and reliable coverage. And then later they came out with Face and Body Foundation, which is the one that I had first heard of. This was a little bit more lightweight, more skin-like finish. So opposite of Studio Fix. Studio Fix was more full coverage, where Face and Body was a little bit more skin-like. I feel like I heard a lot of people talk about Face and Body during fashion shows, putting it like on the neck. It was like people would literally use it on the body as the name intended. And I heard a lot about this more from people who worked in editorial, but I would love to try it as well. Also, a makeup artist fan favorite are the paint pots. So these are long wear cream shadows, but a lot of people will use them as primers. So specifically, I remember the shade Painterly everyone talking about, and is it Groundwork, the other one? But these had a lot of neutral nude shades, but across different skin tones. Because they were so long wearing, people would use them to prep the eyelids. And because they could find a neutral shade for themselves, they could prep it. And then they could use eyeshadow on top of it and it would last even longer. So this has been a staple for people, both makeup artists and non-makeup artists, for years. I had one, but not a shade that was neutral at all, but I did absolutely love it. It was a beautiful brown shade. Also, the eyeshadows, again, one of my first experiences. I kept them for 20 years. One of them was shattered in college, and I still kept it for another 15 years because I didn't want to get rid of it. But they were known for their pigment and also a massive shade range. You could literally find any color ever in their eyeshadows, and they also were refillable, but the refills really made them popular with makeup artists because you could make your own pro palette based on what you needed. So that really became a staple for a lot of artist kits for years and years, and I'm sure still does. Okay, another iconic product, the MAC Fix Plus setting spray. So I I'll post this in the show notes, but Robert Welsh, who is one of my favorite YouTubers, he's a professional makeup artist. He worked at MAC for years. A lot of my favorite makeup artists who moved to beauty YouTube were MAC makeup artists. Robert Welsh, Pixie Woo, you name it. And he talks a lot about this because it's called Max Fix Plus, but it's not technically a setting spray. So people get really confused about it. It's more of a finishing mist, and it's used to just kind of melt all the makeup together, but people will also use it for skin prep. People seem to be very confused about what this does. And so Robert actually made a video not that long ago explaining what Max Fix Plus does and that how to use it. And so if you are someone who has tried this and it hasn't worked for you, I'd recommend checking out his video because I do think that he explains it better than I'm going to be able to. But it's supposed to just kind of melt everything together, but I don't think it's supposed to be like a setting all day spray, if that makes sense. If you know, let me know. All right. Lastly, the MAC Strobe Cream. So this was actually one of the original glowy skin products in the industry. So this was, artists would use this backstage under makeup for radiance. They would use it to just kind of reflect off the lights, editorially, all that stuff. But this was long before like light strobing was a popular thing. Before dewy skin was a trend, MAC had their strobe cream, and they've since expanded the strobe cream into like skin tints and blushes and things like that, but their original strobe cream was long before other people did it. And then I'm going to give my own iconic product. I don't know if as many people would say it's as iconic as the rest. I think it's one of their best products, and that's their Glow Play blushes. I love these. I will be doing a reel also using these blushes. I have two of them. They're kind of like a putty. Again, before, I know Rare Beauty just came out with it, and now people are coming out with like more of the putty kind of K-beauty inspired blushes, but this has been around a little bit longer, and it's like kind of this like putty bouncy blush, and I absolutely love them. I'm wearing it today. I don't know if you can see, but it has a little bit of a glow. And it's a very buildable blush. So you can do like a wash of color or you can build it up, but it's super, super lightweight. And the brand calls it a mirror free formula because, like, you literally don't even have to look at what you're doing. It's not going to run away from you. I have to agree. I also think it's a perfect product if you are like on the run. If you're on the run from the law, it's great. No, if you're on the go, it's super helpful because you can just use your fingers. You don't have to use a brush or a sponge or anything. It's just super, super easy. The colors are gorgeous. The finish is beautiful. Not enough people talk about this blush, and I need it to be known. So that's my personal iconic product from them. While it's newer to me, it has very quickly become number one. Okay, and then we're going to just run through some fun facts for a moment. MAC is currently in over 130 countries with over 13,000 artists and 100,000 MAC Pro members. So MAC Pro is the brand's professional membership program, giving working artists access to discounts, exclusive products, and education. And this is one of the key ways that MAC built its reputation inside the industry before becoming a very mainstream beauty giant. And also, for over 30 years, Back to MAC has recycled or recovered your used product packaging, and where possible has given the old plastic a second life. What cannot be recycled is converted to energy. So they have been doing that sustainability kind of close the loop for over 30 years. And lastly, the early M.A.C stores felt more like studios than retail spaces. They were designed to feel like working environments for artists, not just places to shop. And that's why people remember the experience as being very different than going to a traditional beauty counter. And that's a really nice way to kind of wrap up, bookend what I said as well, that it was very different than just going to Macy's and having your makeup done. It felt like I'd entered a cool older sister's room and they were letting me play with their makeup, and maybe we would play a game of Mall Madness later or something. It had a very fun artist vibe, and that was specifically done on purpose. So I'm going to end this episode with a 2024 quote from Andre Branch, who again was at the time the senior vice president and general manager of M.A.C North America. When you think about what M.A.C was founded on, sustainability, diversity, inclusion, artistry, giving back to the community, those things are as relevant today, if not more so, than they were when the brand was founded. Being around for 40 years is no small feat. There are not many brands that can make that claim. And today, we're not just surviving, we're also driving. We're still the #1 prestige makeup brand, and we still have some of the best performance products in the marketplace. It's been an incredible ride, and we're committed to making the next 40 years just as remarkable as the first 40. So those were the Chronicles of M.A.C. Please let me know what you think of the brand. Let me know if you experience going in store and seeing all the vibrancy and colors and artistry. I would love to know your own experience. Leave me a comment. Let me know your thoughts. And please like, subscribe, share, all the things. It's so helpful. I know I say it every time, but it really is. The community is growing, and I'm so grateful for that. So please feel free to share with anyone you think might be interested, and just also share some of the brands that you'd like to see covered on this podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time on the Cosmetic Chronicles.